The kids on Elm Street don't know it yet, but something is coming to get them.
There's something out there, isn't there?
Halloweenies, a Freddy Krueger podcast.
Was locked in a room with a girl who went in alive and came out in a rubber bag.
From the Consequence Podcast Network, the minds behind The Losers Club, comes a new podcast in fantasy terror.
Nancy? There's something wrong with you. You're imagining things.
Halloweenies, a Freddy Krueger podcast.
Consequence Podcast Network.
Hey, welcome to another edition of Kyle Meredith with an audio interview series presented by WFPK Independent Louisville at WFPK.org, Consequence of Sound, and the Consequence Podcast Network. If you're already a subscriber to the series, thank you for listening every single week. In fact, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as we put out interviews at Consequence of Sound. If you're not a subscriber, if you've been here a few times before, or maybe this is your first time, take a moment to hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening from, whether it's in podcast land, at iTunes or Apple Podcasts, or maybe you found us on YouTube or Spotify. You can follow along there as well. Speaking of following along, Twitter and Facebook, at Kyle Meredith /Kyle Meredith. You can find me there as well. Come and say hi. And that's me. I'm Kyle Meredith. Today, my guest, the head and the heart, talking with Jonathan Russell and Tyler Williams about the new record, Living Mirage. This is a much bigger sound than we've heard from the band, and there's a lot of reasons for that. A lot of soul searching, a lot of coming to terms with each other, heading into Joshua Tree out in the desert, and putting themselves back on a good personal track and in a good place. They're going to describe all of that. It's a great story that's put them in a great spot where they're currently at right now. Of course, we'll talk about how all of that influences songwriting, especially with the first two singles. We'll get the stories behind Misconnection and Honeybee, and we'll also hear what they've been up to between tours. In fact, Tyler has been quite the manager. If you're familiar with Lucy Dacus, to a certain degree, you have Tyler Williams to thank for that. And Jon's been keeping busy too. In fact, he's going to tell us about an album he's done with Jackson Browne that ties in with Haiti, and he really touts his merch selling skills. That's really important. Talking about the album Living Mirage, it's Kyle Meredith with the head and the heart. Congratulations on Living Mirage. I mean, the couple of songs especially that's out there so far. This is a much bigger album than you all have done in the past. Is that a fair assessment? The sound, this isn't where you started, at least.
Yeah, that's accurate. It's kind of, I think in our minds, like after making Signs of Light, Signs of Light was the first record where we had worked with a producer, period. And there were a lot of elements from working with a producer that we loved, but there was also a lot that we learned from working with a producer and how to be a little more intentional the next time around. And so our intentions were just to set out and try and capture the core instrumentation as best as possible, make it sound as great as possible and as big as possible without having to kind of fill in gaps here and there just to make it feel big. So I think the engineer, Ryan Nasci, Nasci, and the two producers, Alex Salibin, Salibin, and Tyler Johnson, the three of those guys did a great job, I think, on Johnsson. Johnson's pretty obvious. The Libyan and Nasci. I don't know that I want to leave anybody to their own prices on that one. So.
Yeah, I mean, it just feels like a different record, man. It feels good. It's I think we just kind of approached it, like Jon said, in a very intentional way. And I think the idea when we were mixing the record was like vintage but modern. Like, what does that mean? Like, what would a Linda Ronstadt record or something like that sound like in 2019? Yeah, that was the approach.
I mean, I'll say this. The album doesn't sound like an accident. And I don't know that I would have ever said any of your records sound like an accident, but this one really does seem a bit more planned, if not meticulously to some point, to some degree. I don't know. I mean.
Well, I think it's funny. We kind of went in with, like, no plan. Like, we literally started writing in Joshua Tree, and we were kind of just jamming together. Like, Jon had a bunch of just, like, kind of guitar riffs that he would play, and then we'd all come in and kind of fill in throughout the day of writing out there. So it was really, really loose in the beginning days, for sure.
Yeah, I'd say that it's kind of, we almost like we're intentional about, I guess for my sake anyways, I had sort of seen what it looks like if I show up with like a bag full of like flushed out songs, how how far that gets you. And this band is such a great. I mean, we're just so great at working together musically, and like our chemistry together is so special that I think it can be diminished if anyone has multiple parts already hammered out before giving everybody else a chance. So if anything, on my end, it was more intentional to just, instead of like the band reacting to a songwriter's song, kind of the other way around, like a songwriter reacting to a band.
Yeah.
Which just allowed for a lot of like exploration and new discoveries.
Yeah.
It's interesting, talking about the way the band is, because of course with the last record, part of that story was the lineup was in flux. That's when Josiah stepped out. Would you think of this as a proper start to chapter 2 then? I mean, what was the feeling with having a steady crew as opposed to, what was going on the last record?
Well, in a way, this was also a kind of a new reincarnation, if you will. So we had Kenny take a year off, the piano player. So he took a year off, and Matt Gervais, Charity's husband, is at this point, once we're starting writing, he's full-time in the band with us. He's been touring with us for a couple of years, maybe a few years at that point. And so that was the first time going into a writing scenario without Kenny and the addition of Matt. So it was kind of, there was a big, great unknown sort of question mark. And looking back, I think it actually enabled us to do what we wanted to do in the first place, which was to kind of dissolve this idea, this notion of who we were, what we had to do, or what our roles were within this band. So if anything, the new lineup, if you will, I think allowed for more freedom. I don't think we knew that at the time. I think it was kind of scary in the moments of beginning, because we were like, you don't really know what the chemistry is going to be like. But looking back, I think it actually gave us the upper hand. I think it allowed us to be more free.
I'll say this, Tyler, the drums and bass sound locked in tighter than I think I've ever heard them on a Head and a Heart record.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you credit that to the producer or just spending time with each other. I mean, where do you credit that?
Well, we spent a lot of last year kind of working on our relationships with each other, like everyone in the band. I think you do this for so long and you tour for so long that you start to kind of take for granted who your friends are and, their personality. You kind of have this image in your head of who they may have been in 2011 or 10 when we first started recording. And I think, we had to kind of dissolve some of those past relationships or past feelings that weren't even relevant anymore. And I don't know, I think it's just made us a much tighter, more connected band. And I would say that rhythm section that you're talking about really stems from just working it out, man. As hippie as that sounds, it's true. It's like to do your best work, you all have to be firing together,
You all have mentioned Joshua Tree in there, and I know several cities play a part in this record, but I don't know, some of the focus, it seems, does come back to that one right there. How important was Joshua Tree, and what exactly does Joshua Tree mean to this album, if it means more than the other cities, I guess?
It's kind of that desert freedom that Jon was talking about, like kind of dissolving who we were, or like the idea that we have of what the Head and the Heart is. A lot of that was really heavy, like real heavy vibe at Joshua Tree. It was, there were some dark moments and it was a lot of rediscovery, but that really, that place feels like where kind of the genesis of Living Mirage, this album, started,
Yeah, for me, to add to that, I would agree with what Tyler's saying wholeheartedly. I think for me, I felt like I had sort of plateaued in terms of writing styles, and sort of, I think you kind of get into a rhythm and a flow. I don't want to say a rut, but you get into like a direction as a writer. And me personally, after 3 albums, I was a little, I don't know, I was ready for like a reinvention, for something fresh. And in all honesty, I had no idea what that was going to mean, how I was going to find that, how we were going to find that. And there's a couple of songs. Living Mirage was sort of the impetus of this whole new direction, and for me, this new writing style, which for a couple of songs, Living Mirage and Running Through Hell, were both stream of consciousness approaches in terms of melody and lyric. And I really can't think of a better place other than Joshua Tree to step into a room and have doors and windows open, and to just sort of let your mind just go, and not second guess what you're doing, and just let things sort of come out. So I'd say Jackson Free for sure has there's a spirit to it already that's already there that you can just kind of tap into if you're willing, and it can take you a long way.
I feel like maybe, or I'm at least curious, that we're dancing around something here as you talk about redefining your roles and some darker moments in there and getting good with each other. I mean, was there ever a moment where you all questioned the band? Did it ever get to that point? Is that what you're hinting at?
I think, not to harp too much on the whole desert thing, but it's so stark out there. And I think being out there and all being back together, it kind of revealed these cracks in the foundation of our friendships. And, kind of like with the whole rhythm section thing, like if your talking isn't working, that translates to the way you're playing and the way you're feeling in between playing. And so that sort of revealed a lot of Band-Aids that we had put on our relationships, because for years and years you write and then you record and then you have a little time off and then you go on the road, and there's this vicious cycle, and you just kind of keep putting off we'll work on our relationships when we have time, and then you never have time. And so I think what we realized in the beginning of this entire music writing process was that if we don't start checking in with each other and being friends with one another again, the band, in a way it felt like, I don't know if we'll be able to do another record, because we just weren't talking to each other in ways that were healthy and that were really genuine. And I think if you listen back to this record, thinking about that headspace of how it was on like the front part of our minds of working out relationships together and choosing love over discord, which sounds easier than it is, at least for somebody like me. I think Living Mirage, the whole song for me, is basically like realizing that I have been putting these mirages, these things that can or cannot exist, you either see them or you don't, in front of myself and the things that I wanted to actually get to, and just choosing to believe that love exists and I deserve to be loved and I deserve to give love, whether that's to my partner or my bandmates or a stranger. That was sort of like a light bulb moment for me in this writing period, and I think that comes across in a lot of the songs. And some of it's just me working stuff out with myself, some of it's us working things out together, and then you start thinking, like as a parallel, like there, it just feels like the world in general is sort of feeling similar feelings and going through similar struggles. So yeah, there really was kind of a question mark of like, can we keep doing this? And after this whole record, I mean, we went through a lot. We worked a lot on music, and we also worked a lot on our relationships with one another. And it feels like a new band. It feels like a solid friendship, a solid band.
This is some kind of monster record.
Well, we didn't hire a therapist, but we, Charity played the part pretty well. I think, to add on to that, taking that energy onto the stage every night is like, it's incredible to walk on and know that your bandmates have your back no matter what happens. And, I think that's going to enable us to continue on for years. And, we could have continued on in the iteration that we were in where, people have things that they need to express, but, we could have carried on, but I think we would have made a much worse record for it.
It's interesting that the people you spend the most time with are sometimes the ones you have the least connection with. It's interesting.
Yeah.
I'll use that as the seg, especially that word, to the first single too, because Misconnection, as I read, Jon, is a song that starts out about a misflight around Lollapalooza, but ultimately becomes the story of a band in some way.
Yeah, more or less. There's a couple stories in that one. On one hand, it's how I was flying home and I got trapped in Chicago, and I wound up at a music festival, and I ended up meeting who is now my girlfriend of 3 years. And bigger picture, it's more of like, follow those universal breadcrumbs. Like once you tend to think like, oh, it's not working out, something went wrong, and this is posing a problem. And in reality, it's probably showing you a better route to take. And so just to remain open and see things through, even though you might not think you're on the right path, just keep going. And then on the other hand, that song was such a new style of writing, not just musically but lyrically, that I was struggling with, and I couldn't. About halfway through, I didn't know how to necessarily like get into it or relate to that type of a voice yet. And so it's about, I realized, why don't I just write about the fact that I'm having a hard time writing, that I'm having a hard time finishing this beast.
And I'll say that
3 stories in one.
and I'll say this about the second single too, with Honeybee. I can't sometimes tell, Jon, where your and Charity's voice ends and begins in that song. Talking about different sounds that I'm hearing from the head and the heart. I mean, it all seems to blur together in a way that I guess is new to me.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoy that. Singing in falsetto like I do in those verses on Honeybee is something I've always loved doing. Like when I first started approaching music and trying to take it seriously, my heroes were like Tom York, and I just always loved how he could use his voice as an instrument, and people like Chris Martin, people who can just go in and out of head voice and falsetto and make that a powerful moment. Honeybee was, I think, kind of the first time where I actually got to really do it in a song fully, not just like a melody, but an actual verse or something. And then Charity just comes in so strong. I think in general on this record, I'm blown away by Charity's vocals all over this record. I mean, she shows up in a big way on this entire album.
I'll also say, not that it sounds anything like it, but Honeybee is also like top 3 Tom Petty song for me there. So there's...
Nice. Cool.
I would be curious a little bit in the time between, because Tyler, you dip your toe in management when you're not, or sometimes when you are, with the band and everything. How big a part of your life is that at this point?
Pretty big. I mean, I started out managing Lucy Dacus, and then now I'm managing a band, Illiterate Light, who just signed to Atlantic. So, I mean, it's definitely it's kind of a fun thing to do, and definitely something that inspires me. And it's nice to be on the road, having some work to do when you're in a green room and you're waiting to sound check or whatever it may be. I think sometimes half the battle on the road is finding like how to spend your time wisely or well. And for me, it just feels like a really nice thing to help friends and bands that I find who are, incredible, help them kind of connect to the larger world,
I mean, if you just got a band signed to Atlantic, you're 2 for 2 right now. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good track record.
Yeah, it feels all right.
I want to add to that. I want to give Tyler some props here because, from what he's learning and experiencing firsthand with these bands he's managing, that knowledge and that comfort, comes back to our band, and he becomes a resource of information, and it's nice. I get to learn from, Tyler and I went to high school together, so we sort of, I think, push and pull on things we're both discovering and learning individually, and then when we come back as a band, you kind of check in and grow from one another, and I think that's a big part of what Tyler's been doing with management is been shining back on all of us, so it's a really cool thing.
Now, Jon, I've seen you off the road between tours running merch for other bands. Yeah, are you also bringing that back to the head of the
goes into management. Jon goes into merch. We have different aspirations.
That's the headline for this podcast. Amazing.
No, so that was for actually a band that Tyler was playing drums in a couple of years ago. That was just a fun thing. I was like, we were all friends in Richmond, Virginia, and it was in a time where the Head and the Heart had taken a significant amount of time off, and I was like, oh man, you guys need a merch person? Like, I just wanted to. It's funny, you travel all around and you're like, God, I can't wait to go home. And then you're home for like a week and you're like, oh, you're going on tour? Can I ride with you? So I just hopped in the van. And it was nothing too long or crazy, but it was just fun. It was just hanging out with friends and helping out. I don't know that I'm the best merch guy. I'm not sure I sold anything, maybe a shirt or two.
You were pretty terrible, but we enjoyed your company, man.
Yeah, I definitely discovered what I was and was not good at on that list.
It's important to know those things. It really is.
Yeah. I would also say, if we're going to highlight things that Jon has done on his time off, let's maybe add in something other than the merch.
Please.
I started doing some nonprofit work with a nonprofit called Artists for Peace and Justice down in Haiti. I've been down there a few times now, and it led me to becoming close friends with Jackson Browne, and the two of us started a record down there, basically to try and, so there's an institute called, it's just through Artists for Peace and Justice, and it's like the Music Institute, and we basically came up with an idea. It's called like a song summit, where we would bring down different songwriters to Haiti, and we would sort of do these workshops with these college level students, doing Q&As, and the people that he would bring down to engineer, he would do classes where he would have these students come in and ask questions and watch this engineer work. And then we would write songs down there. We would record in the studio, and we have a lot of local musicians on the songs. And so, I mean, that was an amazing process. That record is, I think, finally going to see the light of day sometime this year. I don't have a title to tell you, but maybe keep a lookout for a project that Jackson Browne and Jonathan Wilson kind of co-produced and engineered. And a couple of the songs that are on Living Mirage I wrote while I was down there. I Found Out and Saving Grace are from those days down in Haiti, and there's going to be a couple. Yeah, it's going to be a pretty great record. It's a very eclectic batch of songwriters on that record. So other than slinging shirts, I had a couple things going on as well.
You're doing all right. You're both doing all right. See, that for me, that would be the greatest parts about being in a successful band. You know, one, sure, there's the fun of creating music and bringing it to the people, but what you can do with those times in between, and especially in ways to make the world a better place in any version. I mean, that's what it would definitely be all about to me. So I congratulate you both on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I will say that's got to be the best feeling of like having any taste of success, which really just means, in my mind, it gives you the luxury of doing more. You know, not just resting on your laurels because you've gotten to a certain spot, but it's like, okay, cool, it's allowed me time to do things for other people, not just for our own band. So yeah, thanks for that. Yeah,
absolutely, fellas, it's been a complete pleasure, this conversation. I thank you all both so much for taking the time to talk today, and again, congratulations on Living Mirage. I absolutely love it.
Thank you so much, man. Thank you for having us.
Yeah, anytime. I will see you guys around. Absolutely.
Sounds good.
All right, take care.
All right, bye.
My thanks to Jon and Tyler of the Head and the Hearts. The new record is called Living Mirage. Hey, before you get out of here, if you haven't already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Again, you can find us at iTunes and Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or really wherever you're listening from right now. After that, head over to WFPK.org. It's where I do a show every Monday through Thursday from noon to 3 Eastern, where you can also find some bonus episodes of this series. ConsequenceOfSound.net has your music and film news. You can find me at Twitter at Kyle Meredith and Facebook/Kyle Meredith. Does it for another edition. I'm Kyle Meredith. I'll see you next time.
Consequence Podcast Network.